This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be a substitute for mental health services.
Discussions in this show should not be construed as specific recommendations or investment advice. Always consult with your investment professional before making important investment decisions. Securities offered through registered representatives of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer, member FINRA, SIPC. Advisory services through Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Financial Wellness are not affiliated.
Welcome to Financial Wellness. I'm Stephanie, along with my childhood friend Chad. This is the place where we unravel the intricate connections between financial well-being and mental health. In each episode, we explore the complexities of personal finance and how our monetary choices impact our emotional and mental states.
Here is where we also discuss and learn how to get better at everything from budgeting to investments to insurance. We share personal stories, expert insights, and practical tips to help you navigate those connections between your financial stability and mental wellness. Make sure to show some love by liking and following us. It really helps a lot. So let's get started. Did you want to go first?
Our mental well-being is directly linked with our financial well-being. We can bring some normalizing and even some humor to these situations. You know, we're both from New Orleans. We like to bring a little fun to the table.
Yeah. It becomes empowering and it becomes something that you control versus something that controls you.
Hey there, Chad. How are you doing?
Hey, Steph, what's going on?
Oh, just living the dream, Chad. Living the dream.
I love how we start like we're in mid conversation because we've been talking forever before we start recording. So we're like laughing when we get going.
Like, oh, this is it. This is the beginning.
I guess we should just get going now. After we've sat here BSing for the last 45 minutes.
Well, I'm excited for you to talk about your trip and all the things that are going on in your life.
Well, I'm happy to do that. So it's spring break, right? So,
Yeah.
my wife and my daughter were both off 2 weeks for spring break. So we went to Florida, went down to the Miami side, stayed with my brother-in-law. Uh, that was pretty cool. Got to hang out at the beach. We went scuba diving, which was
Of course you
incredible.
did.
We did. That was the first real scuba diving trip that we did. So we went scuba diving down in Isla Morada, or I guess they call it Isla Morada. But we went down to the Florida Keys, scuba diving. We brought our family who came down. We caught up with a friend down there, and it was amazing because the training that we did, here in New Mexico was a very cool place to do it, but
Right.
there's no fish or anything in the water to see. It's really just sort of a training place at the Blue Hole. But we got down, we got to see fish, got to swim with them. There was a little nurse shark in the water. I think I had posted a video on my YouTube channel that showed my daughter swimming and she didn't see the nurse shark. I was above her, so I saw it kind of swim under her.
Uh-huh.
And like when she finally saw it, she kind of jumped. But it had no interest in any of us. It was just sort of swimming around. So that was really cool. So we were there for a few days, and then we went over to Tampa and we started house hunting
It's
in
so
Tampa.
exciting.
Yeah. Which was just completely exhausting, actually.
Yeah.
We looked at 14 houses
Oh
in
my
2.5 days. Now, granted, a lot of those were separate models in these new home developments. So it wasn't
Right.
like we went to 14 different locations, but there were a couple places where we looked at multiple models in the same place. But yeah, we did that for 2.5 days. It got frustrating. We didn't find any place that we really loved. Like one place we really loved.
Right.
Loved the house, new construction, it was beautiful, but it was like 35 miles outside the city, and apparently it gets really congested with traffic and everything else. And so we didn't want to do that.
Right.
Then we found a house that was in a perfect location. It was a lot closer to the city, but it was not like the ideal space for me because I work from home.
Right.
And so it didn't have like a room where I could have my own office and have my own privacy. Like if I set up an office, it was going to have to be in this loft and it would just be busy and everything else.
Not private. Yeah.
And we were pretty much just deciding between those two places. And then Thursday night, which would have been our the second night that we were there, and we were leaving on Friday, my wife finds this new development, this new community that was in the location we wanted, and it was new construction that looked like had all the things that we wanted. So we were able to schedule a visit like last minute. We went and
Nice.
checked it out and fell in love with it. And with new construction, we were able to start the process, and I will be putting down our deposit this week.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
so super exciting. We found a house, and looks like we will actually be moving this summer.
Congratulations. Oh my goodness.
Thank you. Yeah,
Wow,
super.
what a whirlwind 2 days.
It was crazy. It was
I mean,
absolutely nuts.
it's like the gold, is it Goldilocks? Like this one's too big, this one's too small, this one's just right.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're trying to find all these balances, right? Because now you're not just talking about the house itself and where you want to live and the space and, family, in our case, we'll have, me, my wife, my daughter, my son will probably be going back and forth between Florida and New Mexico.
Mhm.
He's 20. But then also we want to have space for my mother-in-law who will be living with us part-time. She'll be probably living with my brother-in-law part-time. She'll probably be going back and forth to her house in Greece part-time. So we wanted to make sure we had space for her, but we also just wanted to have space for family to come and visit,
Mhm.
which was a big part of the reason for considering a move was to be closer to family, have access to our family in Florida, to have access to family in Atlanta, to have access to family in New Orleans, and be able to go back and forth and have that family time. So that part's been really important to
Yes.
but also from a location standpoint, making sure that we're in an area that has good schools for our daughter.
Right.
So all those issues came into play and deciding, where to live. So it was a whirlwind. It was stressful. I'm glad it's over.
I am so excited for you all. And I'm impressed too because this is a market you weren't familiar with and a city you weren't as familiar with too. So you were kind of learning about the city along with doing a house search. And I can only
Right,
imagine like
right.
the exhaustion level.
Yeah, a lot of it was trying to learn as much as you could online
Hmm.
before going, but we also knew we really weren't going to understand it until we were there, until we
Right.
were driving in traffic and getting an idea of how
Right.
far away things really were. Like, I'll give you an example. Like, so I'd mentioned, my mother-in-law is from Greece. My wife is half Greek. There's an area outside of Tampa called Tarpon Springs.
Hmm.
And so Tarpon Springs, they say, has the largest community of Greeks outside of Greece. So we went and we
Of
went
course
up,
you went.
we had lunch, and oh my God, like you drive down the street in Tarpon Springs and the street names are in English, and then right above it, they have the same street names written in Greek,
That's
right?
amazing.
And you roll up, like you pull into it, into this community, and it's right on this marina, it's right on the water, and all these restaurants, all these shops, it's all they have all these Greek names. This is Athena. We we ate at all these we saw these little cafes, and we were sitting out at this one place where we had lunch. It was like this walk up little cafe or walk up like stand, and had all this Greek food. So we order all these different things, and we're sitting outside on this patio. And there was this group of these older Greek elders, right? And they're sitting around and they're having this long conversation in Greek. And I don't know what they're saying. And I would just look at my wife and she would just start cracking up. at like random times because she was just sitting there like listening to the whole conversation, and it was these older folks telling these stories about some of it was like all these kind of old wives' tales about
Yeah.
if you get stung by a bee that's supposed to cure arthritis and things like that,
Right.
and like she was just that like it just felt like home to her.
Oh, I
And
love that.
so but while we were sitting there, I'm also, on my phone, like mapping out, okay, well, how long did it take to get here? If we buy this other house, how long is it going to take? How long is the drive going to be? How many miles is that going to be? So all these different elements were coming into play and making the decision. So the
It's
house that we ended up choosing was a lot closer to that community, a lot closer to downtown Tampa. Obviously, with being in Tampa now, it's a lot easier to get to New Orleans, and still, it's a lot easier to get back to New Mexico for meetings and seeing clients and things like that too. So we're excited.
that's exciting. I'm so excited for you all, and I'm so glad y'all will be closer.
I know, I know, I know.
That's that's part of the whole thing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So you have some exciting move news
Yeah.
as well, I believe,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I know. Did I tell you? I don't know if I told you this. I made a decision. So I've gone back and forth, which is going to be really good for us to talk about today because of our topic today. But I've gone back and forth. I own my house, current house that I'm living in,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm moving to a market that is more expensive. And, just I'm not going to be able to buy a house and still own my house here.
Right.
So originally I was going to rent and just kind of rent my house out, but I financially that just really doesn't make a lot of sense. And so I decided I'm going to move in with my parents short term and put my house on the market and sell my house. And once I sell my house, I'll buy a house in New Orleans. So I'm gonna they have two bedrooms upstairs and a bathroom upstairs. I'm just gonna take my little apartment upstairs on top of their house.
Yeah.
And
Good for you.
yeah, and I think financially that's the right decision. I also think it certainly is not easy as an adult to move in with your parents, but my parents are at the point in life where they need some help. And they're also very good at telling us not to help them.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? They're like, no, we don't want to put you out. We're fine. So it'll be good to just kind of get an idea day to day of what they need.
Hmm.
And I'll be able to help them while I'm there, but I'll also know a little better what their needs are and what we're going to have to put in place support wise for them. And so as challenging, I mean, it's going to be an emotional challenge being, in my parents' home instead of my own home that I'm used to, living autonomously. But I also think this, I'll never have an opportunity to spend this kind of time with my parents again. So I think not a lot of people have the benefit of having their parents still around at our age. So I'm gonna, I'm
Right.
gonna, I'm gonna lean into it.
Well, good for
So
you. That
yeah, I'm
sounds exciting.
excited about that. And I continue to just purge my house. I've been here 9 years. So,
Hmm. So you're already starting the process of boxing things up and what?
oh, boxing, no, I am throwing things away at this point.
Oh my God, I'm looking forward to getting rid of a lot of stuff. We have a
Yeah,
shed in the backyard that has boxes of things that I haven't seen or opened or looked at in 5 years. And there's something in me that's gonna tell me, "Ooh, I want to keep this. Ooh, I want to keep that," when I know I should just throw it away when I haven't looked at it or cared about it. Probably longer than 5 years because it probably just sat in my garage at my other house before
right.
we moved into this house. So,
Well, and I've also kind of shifted careers a little bit. I was in academia for a long time, so I had all these books and I had all
mhm.
these resources that I was keeping for my classes, and I don't really need that stuff anymore. Even if I go back to teaching at a university, most everything's online now. But I'm not like there's certain things I feel really uncomfortable throwing a textbook away, even if it's in the recycling bin.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just weird stuff like that that I'm kind of
Right. Now,
doing. But yeah,
so you're planning on staying with your parents while you sell your other house and until you get a new house. What
yeah.
kind of time frame are you expecting that to be?
So right now I've been commuting 3 days a week. I say that like I've been doing it for ages. I did it last week. And so I'm going to commute until June, and then I'll move in with them at the end of June.
Okay.
Yeah. So that'll give me some time to really get my house in order and get it to, there are a couple of things I need to do around here to get it ready to sell. And it'll be good for me to be out of the house to be able to do some of those things. So yeah, so I think I'm wanting to put it on the market in the beginning of July.
Okay. And so how's the house hunting been going for you?
Well, I was originally looking to rent, and that market is ridiculous with rent.
Hmm.
And gosh, there were so many things about renting that were a challenge for me. And but the housing market itself is I have I'll be downsizing for sure.
Right.
But yeah, I think there are a few areas in town that will work perfectly for me and have houses in my range. So
Yeah. Well, I'll
well,
tell you though, we were looking at renting too.
yeah.
And so when we were doing a lot of our Redfin searches online, our home searches, we were looking at homes to buy. But we
Mhm.
were but then we really had a push to rent a place too. And in part, the rental conversation really centered around moving to a new community and not really knowing where the best places were to live.
Right.
And so we were trying to decide, well, what if we just rent a place for a year and get
Hmm.
a real feel for the different communities around and then buy a year from now?
Right.
So we went back and forth on that. And at one point we were all in on renting. And actually renting houses in the Tampa market really weren't that bad.
Yeah.
It really wasn't that bad cost wise. And I had mentioned before the house that we're in currently is a rental.
Yes.
And so doing a comparison on the amounts that we would be paying out there, I mean, it was a wash. And in some cases, we could pay the same amount for a nice amount of house. And I was impressed, or I guess the word would be shocked. I was shocked by how low rent was in some of those communities outside of Tampa. But we were also looking at buying. And so,
Yeah.
we were kind of weighing all these different factors, right? So, we pay out of pocket for a year for rent. We get a good feel for the community, and then we make a decision to buy. Or we find a home that we like, we buy it, and we had to weigh all the different pros and cons of doing that. And
Hmm.
so ultimately we did decide to buy, and we decided to buy in part because we felt pretty comfortable about the community. But we also decided to buy because we knew that we would be buying into new construction.
Hmm.
So a brand new home that we felt would appreciate in value over time. So if we did decide that we didn't like the community after all, or we wanted to move, we would have a really good chance of selling the home and at least recouping what we paid into it, factoring in, down payment and all those costs of buying a new home, right? Your down payment, your closing costs, all those, broker fees, all those different things that are just sort of out of pocket and extra on top of what you invest in the house. So we felt that the house would appreciate and that we'd be able to at least recoup that. And given the location, given that it's new construction, we felt like we wouldn't have any issues trying to resell the house if we really didn't like the community. So that was a big part of our thought process. And
Yeah.
but also there was an emotional component too.
Right.
which was
Right.
I had owned a home before that. Um, and then this particular home we rented, and I really just emotionally wanted to have my own place again.
Yeah.
And
I get that.
wanted a place where I could go and build things in the backyard if I wanted to, build a patio, or if I wanted to paint rooms how we wanted them, or if we, whatever modifications. There was definitely for me there was a massive emotional component of feeling like the space was mine, and that also felt good when we made the decision to buy.
I get that. And I mean, like, you and I have talked a lot about this, and that's why we decided today to talk about renting versus buying,
Hmm.
because you and I both have gone through, we're in it right now. When we were making these decisions right now.
And
And
along a very similar timeline too.
yes, I know. I very parallel timelines, and which is really, you all have been planning this for a long time. Mine kind of just came up. I've been planning it in my head, but I didn't have a plan moving forward. So I've actually talked to a lot of people about renting versus buying as a result of this and previously. And I think, and you and I have done the research, we've listened to different um, podcasts and read articles, and this is such an interesting topic that I think it's going to be fun for us to really dig into, besides our own personal experiences. But what are the financial implications? What are the emotional implications? You said you were emotionally ready to buy a house. Like, I'm emotionally having a hard time with selling this house because I love this house.
Right.
So, like, yeah, let's dig into these
Oh my God.
things.
So you mentioned your emotional attachment to your house. Now,
Mhm.
when we staged our previous house that we sold,
Right.
I walked through the house and I felt this massive sadness as we were selling it. Like, we had sold it, we were going through the process. I was doing sort of even after we sold it, we were doing these final touches. The new buyers, they wanted certain things done, right? Like they wanted us to leave the curtains for whatever reason. They wanted us to leave the curtains and the curtain rods. That wasn't part of the original deal, but we're like, okay, what the heck? So I went and I had to go and rehang the curtains and the curtain rods. They wanted some things taken out of the garage. So I went and did all that. And this was the night before they were supposed to move in and take ownership. And I was doing all these final touches. All the carpets had been steamed, and these are things, when you have, a teenage and a young child,
Right.
the house gets a little grimy, right?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so the house was like completely cleaned and power washed, and the walls were clean and everything. And I'm walking through this place and I'm just thinking about all the memories, and then too, that was the first place that I bought by myself,
Yes.
and and all these different things came into play, and emotionally I was sad. I was really sad. And even now I'll look at pictures of it and still feel like a certain degree of sadness about it. But
Yeah. I mean,
that
home is so important, right?
mhm,
Our home. It's not just a house, it's a home.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it's such an important part of our lives. I mean, gosh, after COVID, how important did our homes become?
right. No, exactly. I was I was telling my wife the other day, because I had gotten divorced and I lived in a condo for a few years that I had rented, and lived there for 3 years while I was sort of in this transition, and then got to the point where I was ready to buy a home. And the night that we did all the paperwork and closed on the house and I knew it was mine and all this, I had a bottle of wine.
Hmm.
And I was sitting there, and at the time, my son would have been around 8. And we got online and I started looking at fatheads, the big
Hmm.
stickers that you put on the walls with all the athletes. And, I was super excited. I ended up, and they're not like super expensive, but they're not cheap either. And I ended up buying a LeBron James, a Derek Jeter, and a Drew Brees fathead
Nice.
to put up in my son's room. Like I was like, yeah, let's do this. I was just so like on this high of having like
You
my
can
own
put things on
space
the
that I could,
wall.
yeah,
Yay.
my own space that I could create, and I could create this home for my son and all these different things. And it was just like this massive emotional high. And so all those feelings kind of come in when you leave a place.
Yeah.
And then but the new place has its own memories that you create.
Right.
But
Right.
that's all like purely emotional and
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily factor in to the financial bottom line.
Right. And it's a lot. Moving itself is expensive.
Oh God, moving's a massive pain in the butt.
It really is. It's emotionally exhausting. We're talking about getting rid of things and going through things is also going through memories. I mean, it really can be a very financially, it's a huge financial decision, but it can be a huge emotional decision as well. And I was thinking about this when because I knew we were going to be talking about this today. I believe I am someone who makes more emotional decisions than financial decisions, and I probably need to balance the two of those.
Well, and it plays in, particularly
Yeah.
plays in the emotional part plays in when you're trying to decide whether to rent or buy. And
Hmm.
one of the issues that did factor in was this stigma, right? This
Right.
stigma of, if you're renting a place, then you're just throwing money away. You don't have any ownership. Where are you in your stage of life that you're renting instead of buying? All these emotional stigmas that people say are factored in. And whenever I listen to or hear financial people talking, one of the things that I don't like or I don't agree with is people will typically say there's one way to do things. You should do this and then you should do this without
Right.
factoring in people's individual circumstances. And so that's one of the things that I hope we get across in everything that we talk about is that everybody's life is different. Everybody's financial situation is different. Everybody's stage in life is different. And one of the things I had to remind myself is, in part, we were renting because we didn't know what we were going to be doing. We didn't
Right.
know if we were going to be staying in New Mexico. We didn't know if we were going to make this our permanent home or if we were going to move. We were thinking about it. And so it didn't make financial sense for us to put in all those upfront costs into a place that we didn't think we would be in for more than a year or two. It it
Right.
it ended up being 5, but we didn't know that at the time.
And there
But
was no way to know.
right. And then each year it was like, okay, well, this will be the year that we move. And then the next year.
Hmm.
And so emotionally, at the end of last year, when we decided to stay one more year, I think emotionally for me, it was sort of a that's it moment. Like, this
Okay.
is it. We are doing something. We are either buying our forever home in New Mexico
Hmm.
or we're moving. And
Yeah.
sort of this all or nothing thing just doesn't always make sense for people. So when
Right.
we talk about the renting stigma, you have folks who will say, why are you renting? No one should ever rent, right? You should always
Yeah.
buy a home. Or you hear well, home ownership is the gateway to wealth creation and wealth building. And that's a whole nother conversation that we can have about this. But there are all these
Yeah.
things that people say about home ownership that we've heard over the years that
Hmm.
don't always apply to everyone in everybody's situation and may not necessarily always be true.
Right.
So,
And that stigma is such an interesting thought, like, are people embarrassed to say that they're renting if they also are feeling like they're financially successful? Like, I've heard people say that, and that seems a little silly to me that
mhm,
that there would be this stigma because not all markets are the same, not all people's life experiences are the same. When you and I live in an area that where home ownership is relatively affordable, considering we're not in like New York City, we're not in San Francisco, where buying something to me sounds like completely inconceivable.
Yeah, and
So
where
the
renting is
market's
the
low.
norm.
Yeah, renting is the norm.
Right.
Has to be. Even
Right.
people who make $1 million are renting.
Yeah. But that's an interesting part of the conversation too, is that regionally there are areas where that's just sort of the norm. There's no stigma about
Right.
renting versus buying. It just seems like the norm, and there's no sort of emotional negativity towards it. Like I was talking, our cousin who lives in New York City, he has this great apartment and he rents, and it's like that's what we do.
Right.
And but if you were living in, a different state or somewhere like you're saying, somewhere in the South, it's just a different conversation.
Hmm.
But again,
And
that's all emotional, right? It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the financial bottom line.
and that brings up such an interesting point. But all of the things that I've learned recently about home ownership, and I've owned a home for quite some time, I didn't look into any of this when I was buying a home. I didn't really understand all of the fees. And, I knew you had to have money set aside for repairs and different things that might happen with the house. But for me, buying this house was very much an emotional decision. I went ahead and I did it without, part of it was because that's just what you do as someone who was my age and at my place in my career. It was time for me to buy a house. Like I'd owned a condo, but it was more of a this is what you do kind of thing, rather than I hadn't gone through and looked at all the financial implications of it. I hadn't really investigated everything that I needed to investigate. I just did it really because that's what I was supposed to be doing.
Right.
Um, and it
And
worked out. But yeah, I mean, when I had to put a new roof on this house, it was very painful
right,
financially and emotionally.
right, 100%. I mean, in my old house, I had to replace the hot water heater, and
Oh,
that
wow.
was also financially painful at the time. But yeah, no, roof is a huge consideration. I mean, that can run 10, 15, $20,000 depending on the side of your roof. It's a heavy lift. You
And
know,
on a ranch that's very long.
it's funny you said that because I just had this conversation with my brother-in-law last week when we were looking at houses, and he mentioned that there was a house that we were looking at, and it was a two-story house, beautiful home. And he looked at the roof and he's like, "Man, you might have to replace that roof at some point." But the thing he said was, "But your house, the footprint on it isn't as big because it's a two-story, so the roof isn't as big versus his house, which is a ranch style house. So the roof is longer." And I never thought about that until he mentioned.
Oh, I didn't think about it either until I had to put a new roof on my house. And my friends who have a ranch style house actually in Atlanta, very similar layout to mine, were like, "Oh yeah, it's mansion priced roofs on not mansion sized
Right,
houses."
right. No, it's a real good. So those are
Mhm,
considerations, right? So all the costs that you of your repairs, which is typically about 1% of your home value per year. But now,
mhm,
you're talking about fixing a hot water heater, fixing your
mhm.
dishwasher.
AC
I had this
unit.
I had this plumber come in to put in a faucet in the kitchen. And this dude comes in. He was in the place, he was in the house maybe an hour. And
Mhm.
now this was before I really got into like doing things myself. But
It
I'll
was
never
probably a good prompt.
so I want to keep in mind I had some handyman guys that were friends of a friend. They
Hmm.
were installing a backsplash and new countertops. So we were putting in new countertops, had a granite company that was coming and putting countertops. The handyman guys were like doing this matching backsplash and putting all this, and they worked in the kitchen doing the backsplash and everything, probably 2 or 3 days getting
Right.
everything put in right. The plumber comes in, puts in the faucet, and charges me about the same as I paid like three dudes to come. And I was like, "So what's the charge for this?" And he goes, he just sort of pulls a number out of his butt, right? It's just like, and I just looked at him. I was like, and in the back of my mind, I paid him. And
Yeah.
in the back of my mind, I was like, this is the last time I'm calling you to do anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I was so upset.
Oh, electricians. When I first bought my house, I was trying to fix a few things and get some wires grounded, things like that. And he comes in, he fixed one thing, he looked at a bunch of other stuff. He tried to fix something, but he didn't fix it, and it was $700.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, what the hell?
And that's when I was like, I need to start learning how to do things myself. And that's what
Hmm.
YouTube's been great for that. But so repairs, I mean, repairs, that's a fee that homeowners have to pay that renters don't, you know,
Right.
but other costs associated with buying a home, you've got your fees and the broker's commissions, which those don't add to your equity in the home. That's just extra money that you have to come out of pocket, right?
Mm,
So that inflates what you have to the cost of the home. Obviously the interest on the mortgage, and we're in a space right now where mortgage rates are up near the 7% range. So that's a hefty consideration
yeah.
compared to, where they were just a few years ago. So that's a consideration. Down payment. You have homeowners have to be able to bring, 10, 20% to the table at purchase. So those are those additional costs that renters don't have to consider.
Yeah.
So there's a timing, like which one is better, right? And again, for everybody's situation, it's that answer is going to be different.
Right.
But generally, if you know you're going to be in a home for a substantial amount of time, 5 years, 10 years, then financially it may make more sense to buy. If you don't know if you're going to be in a place for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, then it may make more sense to rent. It's just everybody's got to weigh those numbers on their own. And there are actually online tools to be able to do that. And we'll talk about that later. But I'll talk about it now. Because I was
Yeah. Talk
messing
about it
around.
now, Chad.
I was, I was, I was messing around online. US Bank has a really cool tool on their site. And I'm sure there are others. I'm sure if you just Google rent versus buy calculator, but the US Bank one I like because you could put in a lot of information and it'll tell you what your out-of-pocket costs are over the amount of time you expect to live in the house. And then you can compare your costs between renting and buying. The thing it doesn't do though is it doesn't take into account the appreciation and the value of the home if you do consider selling it 10 years down the line, but at least it gives you an idea of how much you would pay out of pocket. The other one I was messing around with is on NerdWallet. And again, you put in some different information to compare the cost of renting versus the cost of buying. But the thing I liked about that one was that there's like a sliding graph and you can find your break even point where it makes
Oh,
more sense to buy. Like how many years would you need to stay in the home you purchase to break even and make that be more beneficial financially versus renting. And so there are tools out there for people to use, but the two I was messing with was US Bank and NerdWallet, and I thought they were pretty helpful.
I'm glad to hear that too, because I've heard some of the formulas before and they sounded very confusing. It's like
Right.
multiply by point two, and it was, oh, how many years? And
Yeah, and ultimately, what does that mean? But again, those are just the numbers, and I'll tell you, for years as a financial advisor, I've told clients, and I still to this day will tell people, we have the financial decisions that are just based on the math of what we're trying to do. And the math of the financial decision says that we should do X, right?
right,
But that doesn't factor in the emotion surrounding it. Like we talked about debt, right? I've had clients where I've done a financial calculation and it made sense to where somebody, they were trying to decide whether or not they should pay off a debt or whether or not they should invest the money. And I said, well, it depends on the interest rate. And,
Right,
there
right,
may be, if you take that money and invest it, you may get a greater return on that money than what you're paying in interest. And so financially over time, it may make more sense to invest that money and just pay out this loan or this debt because your interest rate is so low.
right,
And in some cases, the clients say, well, that makes sense. I'll go ahead and do that. And in some cases, people say, I just want this paid off. I just emotionally, I don't want this debt on me. I just want it paid off. And can't really argue with it. Can't argue with how somebody feels about having a debt paid off. So,
right,
in a lot of cases, the same is true of renting versus buying. And whether or not the numbers make sense, sometimes there's a feeling that a person has and it could go either way. It could be that I want a home, own my home. I want the security of having a home, or I don't want the stress of owning a home.
right, right.
So,
Well,
so,
and one of the things that really came up for me when we were thinking about this conversation is that what has changed for me over time as it relates to the emotional need for a home.
mhm.
And you know what played a big role in that?
What?
Katrina.
Yeah,
I mean, the I owned at the time I owned a condo. I mean, the bank owned it. I was
right.
paying a mortgage on a condo. And I realized as I was thinking about this, I moved to Atlanta, moved to Austin, and then I moved back to Louisiana. And I did not own a home in either Austin or Atlanta. I knew both of those were temporary because I wanted to get back to Louisiana. So I've never owned anything outside of the state of Louisiana. But now I'm about to go back to the city that flooded
Right.
and I'm thinking about investing in real estate because I want my home to be there. But home is very important. And New Orleans has always been home and I want to get back there. But yeah, it's very interesting how and those are deep, deep emotions. That's deep connection to this idea of home. Yeah, that all that's been coming up as I've been thinking about renting. And I went and looked at all these rental properties. And you know what I felt like, Chad?
Mhm.
So I have dogs. So that was always
Right.
a sticking point for rental. Otherwise I think I'm a pretty good candidate for rental. But there was all this rejection. I got rejected for for a
Right.
few
Well, it's
places.
funny you say that because when we were searching for rentals, you can filter your search, and we were selecting places where you could have dogs, and the options shrink
They
considerably.
shrink. Yes. But then you have to show this random stranger who's going to be your landlord, your bank statements, and they do a credit check on you and they know a lot of information about you. And it just felt very invasive. I don't know why it doesn't feel as invasive to me to send all these things to a mortgage broker.
Right. Well, you don't see that broker face to face much. Like you will have a face to face relationship with your landlord.
hmm And it felt like they were kind of in charge of a big part of my life.
Did you feel like they'd be looking at you and being judgmental?
Yes, I did. I felt that. It's just been such a weird experience
Yeah.
to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're really going through a lot of different emotions. But the biggest emotion is the emotional toll of decision making
Yeah.
and the stress of decision making.
So we've been talking about like balancing this idea of making a good financial choice while also taking into consideration all the emotions around it. How
hmm
how do we how do we do that? I mean, I know how I've done it, but generally speaking, how do people generally handle that?
I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not a how- I
I
guess
think
a better way to ask that question is like what's happening inside of people and how do they get to those decisions?
Well, one of when as I've been going through this myself, I've had to really think about um, what are reactions for me and what are responses. And I know that that doesn't probably make a lot of sense, but what are my emotional reactions and what are responsive, thoughtful, well thought out decisions? And giving yourself the space to recognize the difference between the two. So I've been using a lot of stress management techniques recently because as exciting as it is to move to a place that you want to move to, you stress and excitement are very similar and in how they manifest in the body. And so I've had to go back to doing more meditations and being more mindful and just positive self-talk, like letting myself know it's okay to take a step back. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to get more information. I was feeling a lot of pressure to move quickly on finding a rental, and I found myself becoming very scattered. And
Hmm.
so as I was becoming more aware that my stress was increasing, I decided, again, decided I was going to take care of that stress and give myself the permission I needed to slow down.
Yeah.
So the pressure of timelines, I think, can also increase the stress when it comes to these decisions, especially as it relates to moving. When you're renting, you have to give your landlord a timeline of when you're moving out, but you have to have something lined up to go to. So, in my particular instance, everything that I have done has been okay, stress management is number one, and don't make quick decisions.
Yeah.
Talk
So,
to people you trust about those decisions and give yourself time. I'm sorry, I didn't
right.
mean to.
No, no, no. You had said something and I want to come back to it. You said that you were feeling pressure to make a decision. Was that
Mhm.
pressure coming internally or was it external pressure from others?
It was probably a little of both. I've been wanting to move to New Orleans for a long time. I got this job in New Orleans. I was like, oh my goodness, I start this job on this date. I've got to be there and I need to live there. But in reality, I have the ability to commute a few days a week and do the job that I need to be doing there. So I do have time to make good decisions. So there was that external pressure. But then the internal pressure came from, I finally get to be there. I want to be there now.
Right. No,
So,
I get
yeah.
that.
Hmm.
And I'm agreeing with you from the internal pressure side. Like it was really important for me to make this decision to have a place and make this move on this timeline.
Yeah.
So to be able to do it during the summer, to be able to kind of transition at a time when it was, when our daughter wasn't in school, right?
Right.
So summertime move, but also it's a timeline that I've been on personally for about 15 years. Like
Hmm.
this is what I plan to do, and now we're here. And to a certain degree, I felt like if I didn't follow this timeline, that I wasn't hitting my personal goals and what I was setting for
Right.
myself and what I was planning to
Right.
do. And
Yes.
so it was really important to follow that goal, but also take into consideration all these other factors, right? Like family. I have my son who may be going back and forth, and how that's going to impact him and work. And I've got clients in New Mexico, right? So how are they going to react? So in my mind, I'm like, well, it doesn't really change anything, right? We meet virtually, we meet over the phone. I can be here if my clients need me in person. So, but how are they going to react and how's that going to impact business? But also the considerations of working in a new community. A lot of
Right.
a lot of the work I do is based on relationships. And I've got some relationships in South Florida, but not really a whole ton in Tampa. So all those considerations came into play. But ultimately, my decision was based on finding a place that I know I want it to be kind of my forever location,
Right.
and also knowing that with all those other considerations, we'll just work to make it work.
Right. Right. Well, and as you're talking, I'm reminded of right after college, I spent the summer in New Orleans working to save money. And in the fall, after I graduated from college, I loaded up my car and moved to California.
Hmm.
And I like part of me just misses the days when you could just, put everything you own in your car and go to an apartment and like
Yeah.
there you are.
And here you are. Yeah. No, there's a lot more to consider now at our ages.
Exactly. There's
Um,
a lot more.
so I wanted to get back to this conversation around the home as sort of a wealth creation tool.
Yes.
Um, because, depending on who you talk to, and again, it kind of goes back to this whole idea of, well, if you're renting, you're just throwing money away.
Hmm.
And and to a certain degree, that's probably true, right? Because you're not investing in your own space. You're just paying. It's kind of like paying car insurance, right? It's just money out the door. And if you never have an accident, then that's really just money out the door. But I think there are some misnomers there as it relates to the home when you think about it as a wealth creation tool. And if you
Hmm.
look at how home values appreciate historically, and historically, the stock market still blows away the increases in home prices, right? I mean, historically, the last 30, 40 years, the market's returned about a 12% return going back to March 1980.
Wow.
Whereas home prices have only increased by about 8.6. So, which is still very good,
Absolutely.
but it's also one of those things where, we don't always see it, right? The house just kind of appreciates and grows, but it only grows by what somebody's willing to pay for it. And
Mhm.
a lot of times I'll tell my clients, they'll say, "Oh, my house, my investments are doing this or doing that, and my house is just growing." And sometimes I'll say, "Well, is it? Like, have you tried to sell it? What
Right.
would your house
You
actually
can put a
sell?"
price tag on it, but if no one's going to buy it,
Right. Have you tried to sell it today? I had some clients actually who I tried to it made financial sense for them to sell their home at the time we were explaining. They were retired. They had this massive home that was priced in the low millions. Now,
Mhm.
keep in mind, this was around 2008, 2009, following the housing crisis and everything else. But in their situation, from a tax perspective, because they had built this new home, if they tried to just hold on to it, they had their adult child living in the house.
Mhm.
So they were living in a smaller house. And generally, if you if your home is not your primary home 2 out of the last 5, or you have to have lived in your house 2 of the last 5 years as your primary home,
Mhm.
for tax purposes and capital gains purposes. Let me say, I don't give tax advice. Consult your CPA, right? Legal disclaimer. But for my client's situation, they had been living in this new home and they were coming up on that year 5 threshold. And they were just planning on, letting their kid live there and they were going to eventually sell it. And we had the conversation where it made sense for them to go ahead and sell the home before they would have these major tax issues. They couldn't sell it.
Yeah.
And the price they were listing it for was way above what anybody would end up paying for it. They tried to sell it, couldn't sell it, reduce the price, couldn't sell it. They had a commercial property that they owned, that they were also trying to sell that was also at $1 million plus price tag, couldn't sell it. They ended up
Wow.
selling that house or selling that commercial property about $300,000 less than what they intended to sell it for, and ended up taking a loss on it.
Wow.
Remember, I said they had their massive home and they had built this second home. They ended up selling the second home, which was the newer home, because that one was easier to sell because it was a lower price tag and everything else. They ended up moving back into their larger home. So your home value really is what somebody's willing to pay for it. And the other
Yeah.
thing I tell clients all the time, I'm like, when you see your investments, you get your investment statements either monthly or you get them quarterly, so you can see them. You can see how
Right.
they're doing. And, with market volatility, most of the times your investments are going to be up, but sometimes they're also going to be down, and that provides angst and stress in people. But you don't get a statement on your house every month. You don't get a statement that tells you every month what someone is willing to pay for your house, right? You can go on Zillow and get an idea, but you don't get that statement. So it's a
Mhm.
lot less stressful. I heard it described like your home value is kind of like that little nephew that you see once every few years, where
Mhm.
they're growing, but if you see them every day, you don't necessarily see them growing.
Right.
But if you don't see them for 5 or 10 years, and then they come around, and you're like, "Oh my God, you've grown so much." Like, well, yeah, I mean, that's what everybody grows. Right. But
Right.
this idea that home ownership is the end all be all for wealth creation, I think has been overblown a bit in our society. There are a lot more ways to generate wealth and pass on wealth to to future generations. That's one way.
Right.
I try to tell people, look, your home is just like an asset. It's like an asset class. Like if you're building out a portfolio, you've got
Mhm.
large company investments and mid-sized companies and small companies and international companies and bonds. So you're building out your portfolio, and those are all considered asset classes.
Mhm.
Think of your home as just another one of those asset classes. Its value will go up and down differently than the others, but they all generally increase over time, just at different rates. Neither one of those asset classes is the end all be all of any of the others, but they all kind of work together when you're building out a balanced portfolio or a diverse portfolio. So think of your home as a part of that larger, diverse portfolio.
I mean, I think that's an important thing for those of us who don't have the same level of knowledge as you. Like if we're looking at growth potential, then you have to make a decision based on the amount of time that you're going to be there. And I think that sometimes isn't the case for a lot of emotional decisions. Like, I want to buy a house. I'm 40 and I need to buy a house. It's like,
Right.
well, or I'm 30, I have to buy a house, or my dog needs a yard. I need to buy a house, which is true. Dogs do need yards. But
Yeah.
you could put that down payment or the beginnings of a down payment into some kind of investment and probably make more and have more access to that money too.
Yeah. Depending on how the market performs. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
generally investments over the long term outperform home values. In the short term, it's always much harder to predict, right? Somebody could do something stupid in our government, and next thing you know, the market drops, or you know what I mean, or but generally, long term speaking, investments generally do better. And
Mhm.
so, depending on a person's time frame, those decisions can have a positive impact, right? It may make more sense to invest that money over time if you know that you're probably not going to be making a purchase anytime in the short time. Now, uh, a I mentioned this to you offline, but we're in a environment right now where CD rates are higher than what they've been in previous years. So if you're looking to park money for a short period of time until you're making a decision, that also may be an option for some folks, depending on the rate that they can get at their bank. But that's a consideration for a short-term place to park money that would at least give you some degree of a rate of return while you're trying to make a decision without putting your money at a whole bunch of risk. So,
It sounds like there are so many different options that I would imagine most people don't even know are available to them. So it's nice to even hear all of these, because the other side of it is, if you're not financially ready to own that house and you purchase it, you're going to lose a ton of money having to try and sell it, 1 or 2 years after you've bought it. So you could be making a very catastrophic financial decision if you're not financially prepared to buy.
Well, it's absolutely critical to make sure that what your ending monthly payment will be, you want to
Hmm.
make sure that that payment fits into your cash flow. What's doable? Do I have enough income to cover these costs? Do I have enough income to not only cover the principal and interest that I'm going to be paying on the mortgage, but you may have mortgage insurance that you have to factor in. You have property taxes now that you have to factor in that you didn't have when you were renting.
Flood
You have
insurance.
flood insurance. You have homeowners insurance. Again, we already talked about potential repairs, and those just sort of pop up. So that goes back to the previous conversation that we had about budgeting and setting money aside for emergencies and that kind of thing. So and depending on the community that you have, you may also have HOAs.
Oh
So
gosh.
the homeowners association. And then you have to watch out for the HOA person that's peeping around your house to make sure that you're following all the rules.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Did you bring your garbage cans in?
Oh
Yes.
my gosh. One time this is in my old house. I was on vacation. And while I was away, it almost never rains in New Mexico, right? It's the desert.
Hmm.
And while I was gone, it rained, it flooded. So, you know, the weeds were like, "Oh my God, we've got water." And the weeds like popped up in front of my house, and I couldn't do anything about it because I was gone. I came home. The HOA person must have been sitting outside my door waiting for me to come.
Watch,
I came home
watching
and
your weeds grow.
and watching my weeds grow. So she comes over and it's like, you need to trim your weeds or remove your weeds. And I said, I just got home from vacation. I will take care of it. And I think I got home on like a Friday.
Hmm.
Saturday, the next day rolls around. I didn't do it because I was tired. So I was going to do it on Sunday. I was going to give myself a day to rest. I was going to remove the weeds on Sunday. I kid you not, Stephanie, that Sunday morning, I had an email with a $50 fine for my weeds from the HOA.
Yeah.
And I screamed bloody murder to that whole HOA committee, like email, like, I am not paying this. I just got home from vacation. I'm going to remove the weeds. I removed the weeds the next day. Like it wasn't that big of a deal. But I got fined for it. Couldn't believe
Oh,
it.
it's infuriating. Oh, it's so infuriating.
And then like a year or two later, I did all these renovations on my backyard. So in my backyard that nobody can see, the yard had these like 6 foot high cinder block walls, right? So nobody
Mhm.
could see into my backyard. And all I wanted to do, I was extending my patio so I could have like more patio space. So we could have, barbecues and picnics and that kind of thing. I extended my patio, but somebody in the HOA saw a construction truck outside my house for a few days and they came knocking on the door. Are you doing work on your house? I'm like, yeah, yeah. Who are you? You have to get this approved by the HOA. And I said, well, in my own backyard? I could see if I was doing something to the front of the house or where people could see, but it's just, I'm doing something in my own backyard. I had to go through this whole process to get an approval for work that was almost done,
Here.
just so they could say that it was okay. I was so annoyed with the whole HOA thing. Now, HOAs are great, right? I mean, they can
Well, they
be,
do a lot of good work, but
they can
there
be.
is some overreach at
Yeah,
times.
I mean, I know my brother-in-law, at his house, they have an HOA, but that includes like lawn maintenance. They come, they mow his lawn. I know in our new house we're going to have an HOA, but that's going to cover Wi-Fi, so it'll pay for our Wi-Fi, it'll pay for our streaming, our television streaming, and some other things. So I know they provide these services,
Hmm.
but they can also be kind of annoying and overreach. So, there's
It
there's balance
depends. It
there.
depends on who's in charge.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that we got a chance to have this conversation. I think it's important, and I'm imagining that we'll come back to it a lot
Yeah.
uh, over time.
Yeah, I'd like to because, what we didn't, I mean, we talked a little bit about interest and what you
Mhm.
would pay but, there are some of these other benefits that people generally say are helpful in owning a home. And one of the things I've always struggled with is, you get this deduction on your interest. And again, I'm not a tax professional, but you get a tax deduction on your mortgage interest, right? But and I've been told, well, you should own a home because then you get you get to get a deduction on your interest. And my response has been, well, do you see how much you're actually paying in interest? You're still paying a ton in interest, even though
Yeah.
some of that is deductible, but you're also paying property taxes
Hmm.
which you don't pay. So you're getting a deduction on the interest, but you're now paying property taxes, which is another it's another line item. So my
Right.
question has always been, and this is probably a question that we need to bring in a CPA, is do those things wash out? Like, is there
Right.
a real value there if you're getting a deduction over here, but you're paying this other tax over here? You know, where do those things kind of balance out? But those are just, I think, if anything, those are considerations and things for people to think about
Absolutely.
versus following the standard explanations of things. Homeownership is the guide to wealth. Well, maybe not. You get an interest rate deduction, or you get a deduction on your interest. Okay, well, what does that number really mean? So some of these,
Yeah.
having
Yeah, I
people
think it'd
really
be
look at
great
these
to
numbers is
bring,
important.
yeah, I think it'd be great to bring in a CPA. They're a little busy right now, but
Yeah, that's probably not a great time.
they're in a bit of a crunch right now, but
Yeah.
I would think that would be a great topic for us to come back to for sure. And you brought up a lot of points that I really do wish I had considered the first time I bought this house, whatever, 9, 10 years ago. I wish
Yeah.
I had been a more aware home buyer. I don't know what difference it would have made in my life, but I think building that awareness is the thing that we've talked about so much when it comes both to your mental health and to your financial health. And building awareness, I think, is kind of a little bit of our mission
Yeah. Well,
in doing this.
yeah, and understanding too, and I hope this has gotten across, is that there's no one hard and fast rule. Everybody's situation is different. And also the hope that people shouldn't feel like there's this negative stigma around renting or that one is better than the other.
Right.
Everybody's situation is different. But if anything, too, my hope would be that people would really look into the numbers for their own situations. We talked about a couple of the calculators that are online, but
Hmm.
but speak to a financial advisor, speak to a mental health professional, particularly if you're feeling stressed out about these kinds of discussions or decisions. Speak to an accountant, speak to a CPA, speak to a realtor. Like we've been leaning on our realtor quite a bit for to help us with some of this decision making. But speak to professionals that can help you through some of these situations to make the best decision that's most beneficial for you
Exactly.
versus trying to follow these rules of thumb that don't always apply to everyone.
I agree.
Well, thanks everybody for listening. We hope that you'll come back and join us again next week when we will continue these important discussions around the connections between your financial health and your mental health. And again, please know that these connections are important, and we look forward to talking to you next time.
Bye, y'all. Thanks so much.